On the morning of August 18th, 2025, something happened that no one, no analyst, no diplomat, no military strategist ever imagined possible. Captain Ibrahim Traore, the leader of one of the world's poorest nations, ordered the entire United States Embassy to leave Burkina Faso within 72 hours. No negotiation, no apology, just a single thunderclap of sovereignty. It wasn't just a diplomatic act, it was a declaration, one that lowered the stars and stripes under the blazing Sahel sun and raised in its place the fierce banner of African self-authorship. Why? Because a report written thousands of miles away branded his soldiers, those defending homes and schools from terror, as no different from the extremists they fought. For Traore, that was not paperwork. It was an insult carved into the bones of a nation already bleeding. What followed sent tremors through Washington, Paris, Brussels, Moscow, and Beijing. Was this madness? Or was it finally the sound of Africa refusing to kneel? Do not scroll past this, because this is more than a headline. It is a reckoning. Subscribe and walk with us for an Africa that will never be silenced again. Ban ko jongivoy noidunkua pan naikong, toisechi tieptuki ban shachnan. On the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the air was thick, not with dust, but with history. It was the 18th of August, 2025. The sky, usually indifferent to the human struggles below, seemed to pause as soldiers lined the boulevard leading to the American embassy. Boots pressed into the Sahel dirt, rifles slung across shoulders. The silence was not peace. It was tension carved into the air. Inside the American compound, diplomats moved quickly. Files were packed, desks emptied, phones buzzed in frantic hands. Over the building flew the familiar colors, red, white, and blue, fluttering weakly as if sensing its own final moments on African soil. At precisely 11 in the morning, Captain Ibrahim Traore signed a decree that shook the globe. With a single stroke, he expelled not just an ambassador, but an entire embassy. Persona non grata. Every American official was to leave within 72 hours. The announcement, broadcast nationwide within minutes, sent waves through city streets, across radio stations, and into rural villages. Back inside the presidential palace, Traore stood before his ministers, his voice ablaze. This is not a dispute over paperwork. This is a wound that bleeds our dignity. The United States has crossed a line. They did not insult a man. They insulted a nation. One minister, visibly shaken, whispered, "Captain, we have never done this before. The Americans will retaliate." Traore leaned forward, both hands on the Grand Oak table. "We are already bleeding. 2,000 of our people died last year. More than 2 million are displaced. Our schools are under attack. And now they compare our defenders to terrorists? Tell me, what cost is greater than dishonor? What consequence heavier than silence?" Outside, crowds began to swell. Word traveled fast. From Kaya to Jibo, from Udalan to Arbinda, people gathered. Banners rose with the words, "Sovereignty is not for sale." Women ululated. Elders lifted their hands. And when the American Marines stepped out to lower the stars and stripes for the last time, the chants became thunder. Burkina Faso, dignity. To many it looked like a funeral, but not for a nation, for an era. At dusk, Traore stood on the balcony of the presidential palace. Before him stretched a sea of faces, tired from years of silence, but now lit with something else, fire. "They tell you," he shouted, "that your soldiers are criminals, but I tell you, they are guardians. They fall so that you may rise. Shall we bow before distant capitals who know nothing of our wounds?" The answer came not from one voice, but thousands. No. Inside, an aide, voice trembling, warned, "Captain, America funds our food, our clinics, our schools." Traore turned, eyes dark as storm clouds. "Aid without dignity is bondage. Bread given with contempt does not nourish. Let them keep their coins if it means we kneel to earn them." That night, as embassy lights dimmed and convoys of black SUVs slipped away into the darkness, The city held its breath. For the first time in decades, the world's greatest superpower had no diplomatic foothold in Burkina Faso. Some watched in awe, others in fear, but none could deny what had happened. One government, once small and dismissed, had stood tall and said, "Enough." And in doing so, Captain Ibrahim Traore lit a fire that no flag could extinguish. But the question lingered in the Sahel night. Had Traore just ignited Africa's long-awaited reckoning, or opened the gates to dangerous isolation? Banko jongi voi noidung kua fanai kong. Toi sichitiaptuk kiban sasnan. It began not with a bullet, but with ink. A report, fresh from Washington, had landed on Captain Traore's desk just days before the decree. He had read it line by line, red pen in hand, his face darkening with every stroke. "They dare," he muttered, voice low, "to place our soldiers, the very shield between our children and chaos, on the same list as the murderers of our Binda?" His aides stood frozen. The defense minister shifted uneasily. "Perhaps, Captain, they do not understand our reality." Traore slammed his fist against the wood. "Not understand? Did they not read the UN figures? 2,000 of our people killed last year. 2 million driven from their homes since 2016. And still, they write this? That our soldiers are no different from jihadists? What arrogance pens such venom?" That night he summoned his spokesman. "Read it aloud," he ordered. "Let the mothers who buried sons hear how America names them." State television obeyed. Across the Sahel, radios crackled with fury as the voice of the government broadcaster echoed. "The United States of America accuses the Burkina Faso armed forces of systematic human rights violations." In the barracks of Kaya, young soldiers listened in silence. One clenched his fists. "So it's true. They call us criminals." Another spat bitterly. "We bled in Jibo. We buried brothers in Yaga. And they call us no different from Al-Qaeda?" By morning, the streets of Ouagadougou swelled with protest. Homemade placards waved in the sun. "Dignity, not dependency. We are not terrorists. We are survivors." And still, it was Traore's voice that thundered above them all. On the steps of the palace, flanked by fatigued soldiers and aging generals, he raised a clenched hand. "They speak of violations," he said, "but do they speak of martyrdom? They count children, but do they count the widows left behind? They write numbers. We bury names." Inside the council chamber, his ministers sat in silence. "This is not about law," he said. "It is about narrative. If they write us as the villains, what history will our grandchildren inherit?" From the heart of Africa, his cry traveled. In Washington, officials called emergency meetings. The Secretary of State spoke with clipped tones. "This is diplomatic suicide. We must consider freezing all assistance." Across American airwaves, headlines blared. "Burkina Faso risks total isolation." Analysts warned of chaos, hunger, and collapse. In Paris, French diplomats, already forced out of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso 2 years earlier, declared the move reckless. "He is severing the last rope connecting him to Europe," one muttered. In Brussels, the EU treaded carefully, issuing cautious statements. Deep concern, they said, over stability and international cooperation. Yet in Moscow, the mood was different. Russian state television hailed Traore as a hero of African resistance. Foreign Minister Lavrov, stone-faced before a forest of microphones, declared, "This is not madness. This is emancipation." Aide whispered to Traore, "Captain, the Russians, they praise you. Shall we lean their way?" He shook his head. "Let them cheer. But remember, dignity is not for hire. We do not trade one master for another." Meanwhile, in Beijing, silence reigned. The Chinese Foreign Ministry declined public comment, but quietly dispatched envoys to Ouagadougou, offering humanitarian aid and trade credits. Their message was simple and shrewd. We do not interfere, we only partner. Turkey, too, stepped forward. Ankara announced new hospitals and schools for the Sahel, standing as a bridge, a brother, a partner in faith. From all corners, the world watched as a nation stood defiantly alone. And in the square beneath the palace, an elder rose with a cane and cried out, "They used to call us beggars. Today we call ourselves free." The crowd erupted, and still the chants rose. Sovereignty is not for sale. But as allies grew distant and enemies drew closer, one question hung heavy in the air. Had Captain Traore earned the respect of history or just the wrath of the world? The embassy gates had barely clanged shut before the consequences began to ripple. In the clinics of Bobo Dioulasso, nurses counted dwindling supplies. Syringes reused, IV bags rationed. Medicines once funded by American aid, anti-malarials, antibiotics, even basic painkillers, were no longer guaranteed. In rural schools, chalkboards bore fading lessons. Teachers whispered among themselves, would salaries still come? Would classrooms survive? Already 6,000 schools had closed in recent years due to insecurity. Now, without U.S. backing, the foundations of education trembled further. And yet across the land, from the markets of Fada to the farms of the Sahel, voices did not crack with fear, but with determination. At a refugee camp outside Jibo, a farmer spoke to a local journalist, his hands rough with calluses, his face worn by years of displacement. We may starve, he said calmly, but better to be hungry in dignity than fed in chains. That sentence traveled like wildfire. Radios replayed it, youth spray-painted it on walls, and in villages with no electricity, elders gathered around battery-powered sets to hear it once more. Still, the pain was real. In the council chambers, anxiety mounted. One minister stood. Captain, we risk losing over $100 million in annual assistance. That is food, health, schools, agriculture. If it all dries up, what then? Traore remained still. Then we ask ourselves, is a school built on humiliation a school worth keeping? Do we teach our children to read, only to tell them they are dependent? There was silence. The finance minister pressed. Already, the World Bank is reconsidering its commitments. The IMF will follow. International NGOs are hesitant. Our budget deficit is growing. Can speeches feed the nation? Traore turned, voice low. What lessons shall we leave behind? That our lives are worth dollars but not dignity? No. Let it be written that we did not trade our pride for porridge. Outside, the debate took another form. Students marched through the streets of Ouagadougou with handwritten banners. We are poor, but we decide. In Kaya, a group of mothers gathered at an abandoned health center. One held her baby close, rocking gently as she spoke to a passerby. Let them call us reckless, but let them never say we bowed. Not everyone agreed. There were murmurs of worry, even dissent. In private, some whispered that perhaps the captain had gone too far. That survival must come before sovereignty. But Traore knew the tide had turned, not in foreign capitals, but in the soul of his people. One evening, he visited a displacement camp near Gorom Gorom. The air was dry. Children chased each other barefoot in the dust. A girl no older than 10 clutched his hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. Captain, will we have food? He knelt, his voice soft, almost fatherly. Maybe less today, he said, but more tomorrow. And freedom. Freedom feeds the soul long after bread is gone. That night, the image of Traore and the girl aired across the country. Commentators framed it not as pity, but as prophecy. The captain had walked where the world had only written reports. In Bamako, Mali's leadership declared, "This is the dawn of a Sahel that speaks for itself." In Niamey, Niger's generals pledged joint patrols with Burkina Faso to secure their borders, no longer as clients of the West, but as brothers in arms. Still, there were fears. Fuel prices rose. Imported goods dwindled. Foreign investors paused. Civil servants waited nervously for their wages. Yet even amid that, hope stirred. Because this raw moment of uncertainty felt different from defeat. It felt like reckoning. And the people responded not with riots, but with rhythm. One radio host in Ouagadougou ended her broadcast with a single sentence. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say Amen in the comments below. Thousands answered, from dusty towns to Capitol towers. Amen. 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 But as August stretched on and the cost became clear, another question began to rise. Can national pride build clinics? Can sovereignty replace salaries? Or will the hunger of dignity be too bitter for a weary people to bear? In Washington, the atmosphere was electric. Reports flashed across multiple screens. Images of the American flag being lowered in Ouagadougou, chants of "sovereignty is not for sale," and a president in fatigues, defiant on the steps of his palace. Inside the State Department's Situation Room, urgency tightened every voice. The Secretary of State, jaw clenched, barked, "This isn't just posturing, it's a rupture. Draft a statement, freeze all assistance. If they want isolation, let them feel it." Hours later, headlines blanketed U.S. media. Burkina Faso cuts ties, American aid in jeopardy. Analysts warned of a domino effect across the Sahel. If they defy Washington without consequence, one lawmaker asked, how long before Mali or Niger do the same? In Paris, alarm turned bitter. French officials, already forced to withdraw troops from the Sahel in 2023, called the expulsion a reckless gamble. A senior diplomat muttered, "Traore is not a revolutionary. He's a gambler, and he's lighting matches in a dry forest." Brussels echoed the concern. EU spokespeople issued grave warnings about deteriorating cooperation, the risk of extremism, and economic collapse. Yet not all voices condemned. In Moscow, state media declared, "A new Africa rises." Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov praised the move, calling it a courageous stand against neo-colonial arrogance. Russian commentators dubbed Captain Ibrahim Traore the Lion of the Sahel. In a closed-door briefing, one of Traore's aides asked cautiously, "Captain, the Russians praise us loudly. Should we consider their hand?" Traore replied without hesitation, "They speak of courage, but dignity is not for hire. We will not trade one yoke for another." In Beijing, diplomacy wore a quieter face. The Chinese Foreign Ministry offered no public applause, no rebuke. Instead, envoys arrived in Ouagadougou with proposals, trade credits, medical aid, agricultural equipment. No speeches, no judgment, just quiet deals. "Notice the difference," Traore told his ministers. "The West threatens, Russia applauds, China observes. Each plays their game. But we must hold the board." Meanwhile, in Ankara, Turkey responded with rare speed and empathy. In a press briefing, an official announced, "Burkina Faso does not stand alone. We are ready to expand our hospitals, our schools, our faith-based partnerships. We walk with our brothers." And across African capitals, from Bamako to Niamey to Accra, commentators dared to ask what once was unthinkable. Had the tide turned? One regional paper framed it best. "Perhaps Traore is not closing doors, but opening new ones." Yet behind every promise, every handshake, every foreign smile, a deeper question remained. Were these nations offering true partnership, or simply waiting to wear a different mask of influence? By the final week of August, the dust had not settled. It had risen. Across the streets of Ouagadougou, murals bloomed like wildflowers. One painted the American flag descending. Next to it, the green and red banner of the AES Alliance climbed defiantly skyward. Beneath it, bold words in local script, "We may have little, but it is ours." The AIS Pact, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, once dismissed as fragile military regimes, now stood shoulder to shoulder. Joint patrols were launched, military exercises coordinated. Plans for a regional defense force, independent of foreign command, began to take form. But beyond the military, something deeper stirred. The idea that Africa could rewrite its story, not with borrowed ink, but with its own hand. Inside the presidential palace, Captain Traore addressed his ministers. "This moment is not about flags. It is not about embassies. It is about authorship. For too long, our continent was spoken for, judged, measured, pitied. That ends now." One minister asked cautiously, "Captain, if aid dries completely, will our resilience hold?" Traore's answer was firm. "If we prepare our children to kneel, then we are building a future of obedience. But if we teach them dignity, even at a cost, then we plant a seed that will outlive us all." Villages across the Sahel echoed this conviction. In Kaya, a teacher reopened a shuttered classroom using benches made from crates and a blackboard made of slate. Let them cut the wires, she said. Our voices do not need electricity to speak truth. Youth groups formed under the banner Africa Rising, organizing cleanups, food distributions, and history lessons about African resistance and sovereignty. They no longer waited for headlines from the West. They were creating their own. And yet the risks remained. Famine threatened. International banking lines grew tight. Some regional leaders worried the AES alliance might become isolated, or worse, vulnerable to new forms of exploitation. But Traore reminded them all, we do not seek isolation. We seek definition. Let us not run from the world. Let us meet it standing tall. Because this choice, the choice of freedom over comfort, was not just Burkina Faso's, it was Africa's. And perhaps for the first time in generations, the question was no longer whether Africa could rise, but how and when. And as the new flag waved in the Sahel wind, a final question lingered. Would this alliance of pride bear fruit, or would hunger prove stronger than history? In the silence after the chants faded, something new remained, something harder to erase than paint on a wall or words on a screen. It was the imprint of a choice. Burkina Faso had not merely expelled a diplomatic mission, it had redefined the terms of engagement, no longer as a subject waiting for validation, but as a voice demanding to be heard. Captain Ibrahim Traore stood not just as a soldier or a president, but as a symbol of what it means when a people say, enough. Enough of reports written without context. Enough of aid offered with condescension. Enough of being named, judged, and managed by those who have never walked their streets nor buried their dead. And for those who still question the cost of such defiance, the answer was already painted across the city walls and whispered in crowded markets, dignity. Captain Ibrahim Traore once said, "We are not asking the world for approval, we are asking it to listen." And listen, it did. Now, as the red and green flag of the AES alliance flutters in place of the stars and stripes, the world watches, some with hope, some with fear, some with envy. But for many Africans, especially elders who remember what it meant to be silenced, this moment felt like prophecy fulfilled. Africa Rising is not a slogan. It is a decision, a journey, a declaration that even if the road is steep and the future uncertain, it is better walked with your head held high than your hand held out. So now we turn to you, watching this story unfold. Do you see courage or do you see recklessness? Do you believe that pride can outlast poverty? Do you believe that a continent long defined by others can now define itself? If this story struck a nerve in your spirit, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe. We were written off for too long. Now we write ourselves. Drop a word of faith in the comments. New Africa, Africa Rise. Africa can do it. It's time for Africa. Let the world hear us speak. Because one day, when history asks who rewrote the future, the answer may begin here, with Captain Ibrahim Traore, with you, with all of us.